Welcome to the Cat Kanavos Show, everyone. I am your host, Kathleen O'Keefe Kanavos, but my friends all call me Kat. I am the author of Dreams That Can Save Your Life, Early Warning Signs of Cancer and Other Diseases, co-written with Duke University medical pathologist Dr. Larry Burke, who's actually a radiologist. So today we have a great guest for you. He was on our previous show on February the 5th, and he was talking about his book, The Story of Our Time. And Dr. Robert Atkinson is an author, educator, developmental psychologist. He has published 9 books. Yes, you heard me right. 9 books, including the 2017 Nautilus Book Award winner, The Story of Our Time, From Duality to Interconnectedness to Oneness and Mystic Journey, Getting to the Heart of Your Soul's Story in 2012. He is an internationally recognized authority on life story interviewing. He's a pioneer in the techniques of personal myth making and soul making. He's a member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, professor at the University of Southern Maine, and director of Story Commons. Welcome to the show, Dr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Kat. It's great to be with you again.
It's great to have you back. We had so much fun on the other show. And just so that our audience can better remember you on the February 5th show, do you have your book, The Story of Our Time, you can hold up?
Yeah, it's right here.
Great. And this was the book that we were talking about on February 5th. Now, tonight, we're going to be talking about a different book. Same author, different book. And can you hold up The Year of Living Dangerously, a memoir of 1969?
Year of Living Deeply.
Oh, I'm sorry, deeply. It was also, I lived those years. They were dangerous.
Confusing. Yeah,
I was in Europe. Those were years of living dangerously.
Yep.
But that was your year of living deeply, and it's a memoir of 1969. And it was a very deep year. It was a year that kind of defined a generation. Would you agree?
It really did. Not only my life, but a generation. And because there were so many things, I mean, the whole decade of the 60s was one thing to live through. And then you get to the final year of that decade, and all of a sudden you have the moonwalk, which gives us a whole different perspective on the planet that we live on. I mean, the thing about the moon, one of the things about the moonwalk is we hear so much about the part that's emphasized is the huge leap of technology to get us to the moon.
Yeah.
And so that's about the outer journey, but the thing that's barely mentioned at all from that is the view back to the Earth and seeing the planet as one planet with no boundaries. That really changed the perspective of so many people, seeing the Earth for the first time from space without any boundaries. I mean, that began to change our worldview, and everything from there went on to kind of follow. So that soon after that, a few weeks after that, was Woodstock. And anybody that knows anything about the 60s knows that Woodstock really changed everything too, because of the 500,000 people who gathered at this farm in New York and just had a wonderful time together, sharing the music, also the sun and the mud and the rain and everything, and living like there were a huge community of the human family coming together. And so those were two of the highlights of that year. And of course, for me, the other big part was being a crew member on the maiden voyage of the Hudson River sloop.
Tell us about that.
With Pete Seeger. So I had known Pete Seeger I had met him the year before
Well, tell us who he is for those of our audience who are our generation now.
Sure. Pete Seeger was many things. I mean, he was the foremost American folk singer of the 50s and 60s. He was the one who Bob Dylan, Peter, Paul and Mary, and all those other great figures of the 60s kind of looked up to and learned from. So he was the premier American folk singer of the 50s and 60s. And he was also a leader in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s as well. And what's not as well known about Pete Seeger, if anything is at all, is that he was also really one of the founders or grandfathers of what we know of now as the environmental movement. The reason for building a replica of the Hudson River Slip, he called it the Clearwater, and that was the reason for building it, was to clean up the Hudson River. And that was in 1969, a year before the first Earth Day, which was 1970. So Pete Seeger was really a leader in bringing about the environmental movement as well. And that was such an amazing experience to be part of that crew, to sail from New York City to Albany on the Clearwater, stopping on all the little towns along the river and giving a sloop festival. I was actually the only non-singing crew member on that maiden voyage, and I got to live on the sloop with all these other great singers of the time, Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Don McLean and Gordon Bach. And
I love Don McLean.
Every time we stopped at a little town along the river, they gave a sloop festival for the town. And that was just a wonderful experience. And the purpose of all of that was to bring people down to the river, to have them see what a mess it was, and to get them to want to clean it up. And that worked. I mean, a few years later, legislation started changing, and the cities and the state started cleaning up the river. And now it's so much cleaner than it ever was 50 years ago.
That's amazing. So what was the one thing, I was in Germany during Woodstock and all of this. And in 1969, I was over there, and that's when the Baader Meinhof gang really took off big in Europe. And they were part of the group that had abducted Patty Hearst. So we were watching all of this from Germany. That's why the year 69 was like a year of living dangerously for us, whereas here in the United States, it was very living deeply, because there were so many changes that were happening. There was a mindset that was going into a tremendous shift, and we were watching it from Europe. So what was the one thing that kind of stuck in your mind about Woodstock? What was the one positive thing?
Well, for me, I mean, everything about it was positive. One kind of sort of side story of mine being at Woodstock was that the week before, at one of our sloop festivals in Nyack, on the way up to Albany, I had met a young woman who we became friends there and spent a little time with, and we said, I just mentioned that next weekend I'll be in Albany, and she said, "Oh yeah, next week is the festival." And I said, "Yeah, we're having another sloop festival in Albany." And she said, "No, I mean Woodstock." And so I said, "Oh well, we could meet there." And we decided, okay, let's meet at Woodstock. This was a week before it happened, and so the sloop gets to Albany, and a couple of us from the Clearwater go over to Woodstock, and we had planned to meet at noon on Sunday in the front of the stage, in the middle of the stage, having no idea that the stage would be 10 feet high and there'd be 500,000 people in front of it. But miraculously, we found each other in the middle of the stage area and met up again at Woodstock and had a great time catching up and getting to know each other more. But the whole thing was really about how much of a family everybody felt like. I mean, it was a huge community that just emerged on the spot in the moment, and everybody treated everybody else like they were family members. And so it was a real sense of experiencing what it could feel like when we do get to the time in our collective evolution of recognizing everyone else as part of the human family. That was experienced right there at Woodstock for those 3 days, even especially during the rain and the mud and everything, because everybody came together.
Somebody just texted me and they wanted to know how you ate. Where did you get your food? Did you bring it? No, it's strange.
There's some interesting stories about that too. There were, of course, they didn't expect 500,000 people to show up, but they did plan on having vendors there, food vendors. Mm-hmm. And so most people got their food from the vendors that were in a special area way back at the back of the area behind where everybody was. Mm-hmm. And so people ate there, got their food there. And then of course, they got low on food. All the vendors got low on food when so many people showed up. And we actually got there really late Saturday night, after midnight, and the music from Saturday night was still going on. So we got a few hours sleep before the music for Sunday started really early Sunday morning. And the first announcement...
Like what time Sunday morning?
Well, most people woke up at dawn because they were all sleeping out in their sleeping bags, or a few had tents, but most people just sleeping bags at the best. And so most people, even though they had been up really late the night before from the music, everybody mostly, woke up around dawn. And that was pretty close to the time that the music for that day started. And the first announcement from the stage at that time was that what we have in mind is something like breakfast in bed for 500,000 people. So they have the food literally to serve everybody with breakfast in bed. But that was the idea, that the kind of feeling that everybody had there. We were all waking up from the night of little sleep, and it felt like that would be a perfect thing to be able to experience, was breakfast in bed. But they said that's what they had in mind, but it didn't quite happen that way.
Nothing probably quite happened the way they planned, because They had so many more people than they had ever planned. Dr. Larry Dawsey says your book is a Rosetta Stone for anyone who wonders what the 60s were all about. So tell us, why do you think your book would be of interest to the generation now? What's in it for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, and that's what I would like people to get out of this short conversation about it, is that it really, even though it's the book release that we're talking about is the 50th anniversary edition of my memoir of 1969, it's really about a time and an experience that contains the archetypes that all of us can experience in our lives. Many of us probably already have experienced the same kind of archetypes. The first one being the call to adventure, which is really signaling our call to destiny, the unfolding of destiny and the beginning of a transformational process. But that call to adventure as the first archetype leads to that transformation and many other archetypes that follow it. So those archetypes are around forever, for every generation. Mm-hmm. And the really important thing, I think, now is for everybody, especially the youth of today, to recognize that they have a call to adventure too, and not to give that any kind of lesser consideration than anything else going on in the life. We're pulled in so many directions today, and we can lose sight of what's important. And it's the importance of this memoir. Reminds us that it's a pattern, it's an experience that
it's a time capsule too.
Every generation has to experience in its own way. So any reader will find a pattern to the way our lives unfold. And of course, I had one of the great fortunate pieces of my experience was to be able to meet the person who wrote the book about the pattern that I was living at the time, and that was Joseph Campbell. I met him by chance one day when I was walking down 8th Street in New York City and saw his book in the window. And just the short version of that is that I found his book and also saw a flyer on the bulletin board announcing a talk by him that same night, just a few blocks away. And so I knew I had to go to the talk and hear what he had to say. And that began an ongoing relationship with him. After the talk, I went up to meet him, and he was so warm and accommodating, and he kind of took me under his wing because I expressed how important what he had to say about the pattern he was describing was for me, because I was living it at the time. So he took me in and said to get in touch with him, and I did, and he became a mentor. And without that direct connection and having him as a real guide and mentor, I probably wouldn't have gotten as much out of my own journey as I did by having him as a mentor. So that's a really key thing, and the whole. So anyone can read about how we can all live this pattern in our lives. It's in his book called Hero with 1,000 Faces.
The Hero's Journey. Mm-hmm.
Hero with 1,000 Faces. And I've also created a brief guide to personal myth making that's available on my website as a free download. If anyone wants to go to my website to get that, you can put your own life journey in the context of that universal, timeless pattern that he describes and that I refer to as personal myth making.
And tell us how to get to your website. And this is a free download for everybody who's watching the show today. Go there now. How do we get to your website?
My website is www.robertatkinson.net. And that's
RobertAtkinson. Yes, I want to make sure.
Yeah, and so you'll see the contact thing to just sign up for those free downloads, and you'll be.
And how do we find your book? How do we find The Year of Living Deeply, a memoir of 1969? Where do we find that?
There's a link for that on my website as well, and you can also get that on Amazon. There might be a little delay on Amazon because they're out of stock right now, but it will.
Wonderful.
It will be available on Amazon.
Great, and that's from One Voice Press. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Atkinson. Dr. Atkinson's book is Year of Living Deeply, a memoir of 1969. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Kat.
And thanks to our producer for being with us too, Rachel. Tune in again next Tuesday when we will have more guests and more authors and more books for you. Until then, remember, everybody dreams, but some dreams save lives. Good night, everyone.